On the morning of the 28th of August, 1905, in a quiet farming village in Switzerland, a laborer named Jean Lanfray committed a crime so horrifying that it would echo across an entire continent and help erase a drink from the face of the Western world for nearly 100 years. Lanfray was a heavy drinker, enormously, catastrophically so. On the day of the killings, he had reportedly consumed a staggering amount of alcohol. Wine with his meals, brandy, crème de menthe, coffee laced with brandy, more wine, liters of it, across the whole day. But buried in that river of drink were 2 glasses of something else, 2 glasses of a strange, glowing green spirit he had taken that morning before heading out to work. And when the horror was over, and the village demanded to understand how a man could do what he had done, the public did not blame the liters of wine and brandy. They blamed those 2 glasses of green. The drink was absinthe, and the murders committed by Jean Lanfray became known across Europe as the Absinthe murders. The case became the rallying cry for a movement that had been building for years, a movement convinced that this one particular drink was not merely alcohol, but something far more sinister. A poison that drove men mad. A green curse that caused hallucinations, violence, and insanity. Within a few years of Lanfray's crime, absinthe would be banned in Switzerland, in France, in the United States, and across much of the world. It would remain illegal in most places for the better part of a century. But here is the strange part. Here is the mystery at the heart of this story. The science that condemned absinthe was almost entirely wrong. The drink that the world decided was a uniquely dangerous poison was, in the end, mostly just very strong alcohol dressed in a spectacular and sinister costume. Absinthe was put on trial by an entire civilization, found guilty, and executed for a crime it very likely did not commit. So here is the question. How did a green, bitter, herbal spirit become the most feared and demonized drink in history, blamed for madness and murder, banned across the world, associated with artists and criminals and hallucinations? And was any of it actually true? Or did the world condemn an innocent drink and get the story wrong for 100 years? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, before absinthe was a symbol of decadence and doom, back to when it was, of all things, a medicine. The central ingredient in absinthe, the one that gives the drink its name and its notoriety, is a plant called wormwood, a bitter, silvery green herb with a long and ancient reputation in medicine. Wormwood had been used since antiquity as a remedy for digestive troubles, for fevers, for expelling parasites, which is where the name wormwood comes from. It is one of the most bitter plants known, and for thousands of years, that bitterness was associated with medicinal power. Ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Roman texts all mention wormwood as a healing herb. It carried an air of potency, of strong medicine, long before anyone distilled it into a drink. The absinthe, we know, took shape in the late 1700s, in the region along the border between France and Switzerland. The traditional story credits its creation to a French doctor living in Switzerland, who is said to have formulated it as a medicinal tonic, a herbal remedy combining wormwood with other botanicals like green anise and fennel, along with other herbs, all distilled together in alcohol. Whether that exact origin tale is perfectly accurate or partly legend, the essential truth holds. Absinthe began its life as a health tonic, a bitter herbal medicine, marketed for its supposed restorative properties. The recipe eventually passed to an entrepreneur, and a small distillery was established to produce it commercially. From those modest medicinal beginnings, absinthe began its transformation into something else entirely, a drink of pleasure, and eventually, a drink of legend. And the thing that first carried it out of the apothecary and into the wider world was, of all things, war. In the 1800s, French soldiers fighting in North Africa were given absinthe as part of their rations, partly for its supposed medicinal benefits, to ward off fevers and purify questionable drinking water. The soldiers developed a taste for it, and when they returned home to France, they brought that taste with them. Absinthe followed them back into the cafés and bars of French cities, and there it caught fire. By the middle and later 1800s, absinthe had become a genuine phenomenon in France, a national obsession. It was so popular, so woven into daily life, that a particular time of day became known as the green hour, l'heure verte, the late afternoon hour when people across France would gather in cafés to drink their absinthe as the working day wound down, the way others might pause for afternoon tea. And absinthe came with its own beautiful theatrical ritual, which was a huge part of its appeal. You did not simply pour a glass of absinthe and drink it. The spirit was intensely strong and intensely bitter, so it was prepared with ceremony. A measure of the green liquor was poured into a glass. Across the top of the glass was laid a specially designed, ornately slotted spoon, and on that spoon was placed a sugar cube. Then, slowly, ice-cold water was dripped over the sugar, dissolving it drop by drop into the absinthe below. And as the water met the spirit, something magical happened. The clear green liquid turned cloudy, blooming into a beautiful opalescent, milky, shifting haze, an effect known as the louche. Watching the drink transform, cloud, and glow was part of the experience, a small piece of theater performed in cafés across the country. Absinthe was not just a drink, it was a spectacle, a ritual, an atmosphere. And it earned another nickname, one that would attach itself to the drink forever: the Green Fairy, la Fée Verte. The name captured everything alluring and slightly dangerous about it. The otherworldly green color, the sense of magic and inspiration, the whispered promise that this drink did something to the mind that ordinary wine and beer did not. If you're finding this as fascinating as I am, take 1 second to hit subscribe. The Tiny Grand uncovers the grand hidden history of a tiny everyday thing every single week. Now, this is where the Green Fairy became something the world would learn to fear. That reputation, the idea that absinthe touched the mind in some special way, was fed enormously by the people who became its most famous devotees, the artists, poets, and writers of the age. In the bohemian world of 19th century Paris, absinthe was the drink of choice for a generation of creative rebels. Painters, poets, and novelists embraced it, drank it heavily, and wrote and painted about it. Some of the most celebrated artistic names of the era were associated with the Green Fairy, depicting it in their work and crediting it, sometimes ruinously, as a source of inspiration and escape. Absinthe became inseparable from the image of the tortured, brilliant, self-destructive artist. It was the fuel of genius and the companion of despair, and that romantic, dangerous glamour only deepened its mystique. But that same association planted a darker idea. If absinthe unlocked visions and inspiration in artists, then perhaps it did something genuinely strange to the brain. Stories spread that absinthe caused hallucinations, that the Green Fairy could be seen, that drinkers experienced visions and altered states unlike ordinary drunkenness. And as absinthe's popularity exploded among all classes of society, and as heavy drinking and its consequences became more visible, a powerful movement began to turn against it. Two great forces converged to condemn absinthe. The first was the temperance movement, the broad campaign against alcohol that was gathering strength across Europe and America. To the temperance crusaders, absinthe was the perfect villain, strong, popular, associated with decadence and moral decline, the very embodiment of everything they warned against. The second force was, surprisingly, the wine industry. France was a nation of winemakers, and in the late 1800s, French vineyards had been devastated by a plague, an insect that destroyed grapevines across the country, causing wine production to collapse and prices to soar. During those lean years, as wine became scarce and expensive, cheap absinthe surged in popularity, filling the gap. When the vineyards eventually recovered, the winemakers found that absinthe had stolen an enormous share of the market. The wine industry had every commercial reason to want absinthe destroyed, and it threw its considerable influence behind the campaign to demonize it. The attack on absinthe was, in part, a business war disguised as a moral and medical crusade. And the medical crusade had a scientific-sounding centerpiece. Doctors and scientists of the era coined a term, absinthism. They claimed that absinthe caused a distinct and terrible syndrome, separate from ordinary alcoholism, a condition marked by convulsions, hallucinations, madness, and moral degeneration. The villain, they argued, was a chemical compound found in wormwood called thujone. Thujone, they claimed, was a dangerous neurotoxin, and it was thujone in the absinthe that drove men insane and violent in ways that plain alcohol never could. Experiments were performed that seemed to support this. Researchers administered pure thujone, or wormwood oil, to animals and observed convulsions and seizures. This appeared to prove the case. Absinthe contained a poison that attacked the brain. The scientific establishment had found its smoking gun. Absinthe was not just strong drink, it was chemically, uniquely dangerous. And then came Jean Lanfray and the absinthe murders of 1905. Here was the theory made flesh, a horrifying, real-world example of an absinthe drinker committing an act of unthinkable violence. It did not matter that Lanfray had consumed an enormous quantity of wine and brandy that day, and was, by any reasonable account, a severe alcoholic. The public and the press fixed on the 2 glasses of absinthe. The Green Fairy had a face now, and it was the face of a murderer. A petition to ban absinthe in Switzerland gathered tens of thousands of signatures. The dominoes began to fall. Switzerland banned absinthe. The Netherlands, Belgium, and other countries followed. The United States banned it. And in 1915, in the middle of the First World War, France itself, the spiritual home of absinthe, the land of the Green Hour and the Green Fairy, banned the drink that had been one of its great national passions. The Green Fairy was outlawed across the Western world. An entire category of drink, and the culture around it, was effectively erased. But here is where the story turns, where the verdict that condemned absinthe begins to fall apart. For most of the 20th century, absinthe remained banned and demonized, its reputation as a hallucinogenic poison largely unquestioned. But when modern scientists finally went back and examined the evidence with the tools of modern chemistry, they found that the case against absinthe had been built on a foundation of error and exaggeration. The central claim, that thujone in absinthe caused a unique madness, did not hold up. But when scientists actually measured the amount of thujone in absinthe, including in old pre-ban bottles that had survived from the Golden Age. They found that the concentrations were far too low to cause the dramatic effects that had been claimed. To ingest a genuinely dangerous dose of thujone from absinthe, a person would have to drink such an impossibly enormous quantity of the spirit that the sheer alcohol would kill them or render them unconscious, long before the thujone could ever affect them. The old experiments that proved thujone's dangers had used pure thujone, or concentrated wormwood oil, in doses wildly higher than anything a drinker could ever get from the actual beverage. And the hallucinations? The visions of the green fairy. Modern analysis concluded that absinthe does not cause true hallucinations at all. What absinthe does have is a very high alcohol content, often far stronger than wine or ordinary spirits. Much of the madness attributed to absinthe was, in truth, the effect of simple, severe alcoholism, made worse by the fact that in the drink's heyday, cheap, poorly made absinthe was sometimes adulterated with genuinely toxic chemicals to fake the color and the louche effect. Things like copper salts or other poisons added by unscrupulous producers. Those adulterants could indeed sicken and poison people. But that was contamination and fraud, not some inherent property of true absinthe. The drink itself, properly made, was essentially just a very strong, herbal, high-proof spirit, no more inherently maddening than any other powerful liquor consumed to excess. In other words, the world had spent a century believing a myth. Absinthe had been convicted on bad science, driven by a temperance movement looking for a villain and a wine industry looking to destroy a rival. The green fairy was never the demon it was made out to be. It was strong, yes. It was easy to abuse, yes. But it was not a special poison, not a cause of unique insanity, not a hallucinogen. It had been framed. And so, slowly, absinthe came back. As the truth emerged, and as researchers demonstrated that the drink met modern safety standards, countries began to lift their century-old bans. Around the turn of the 21st century, absinthe became legal again across much of Europe and, eventually, in the United States. The green fairy returned from exile. Today, absinthe is produced and sold openly once more, its beautiful ritual of the slotted spoon and the clouding louche revived, its lurid reputation now more of a marketing asset than a genuine warning. The drink that an entire civilization banned in terror now sits legally on the shelf, its dark legend intact, but its actual danger revealed to have been, mostly, a story. So why absinthe? Why did this one drink, out of all the strong spirits in the world, become the target of such fear, such loathing, and such a sweeping global ban? The answer is a lesson not really about chemistry, but about how societies decide what to fear. Absinthe was strange. It was green, it was ritualistic, it was foreign in feel, it was tied to artists and outsiders and the decadent fringes of society. It looked dangerous, it felt transgressive, and it was surrounded by an aura of mystery and inspiration. That made it the perfect scapegoat. When a society was anxious about the very real problem of alcoholism, and when powerful interests wanted a rival destroyed, absinthe's exotic, sinister image made it far easier to blame than the ordinary wine and beer that people had drunk for centuries without panic. The drink was condemned, not because the evidence was strong, but because it looked guilty. Its own mystique, the thing that made it beloved, was also the thing that got it banned. The green fairy was punished for being fascinating. And there is a warning in that green glass that reaches far beyond drinking. It is the story of how easily fear, moral panic, shaky science, and hidden financial interests can combine to condemn something, and of how long a false verdict can stand once a frightened public has accepted it. For 100 years, the world was simply wrong about absinthe, and almost no one questioned it, because the story was too vivid, too satisfying, too useful to too many people. It took a century and a return to the actual evidence to set the record straight. Somewhere right now, in a dimly lit bar, a bartender is laying a slotted spoon across a glass, balancing a sugar cube, and letting ice water fall drop by drop until the green spirit below blooms into a glowing, milky cloud, exactly as it did in the cafés of Paris more than a century ago. Somewhere, a curious drinker is tasting that intense bitterness for the first time, half expecting to see a fairy, and finding instead only a very strong, very old, very misunderstood drink. And somewhere in an archive, the yellowed newspaper accounts of the Absinthe murders still sit, preserving the moment a whole civilization decided to fear the wrong thing. The next time you see that glowing green spirit and its beautiful clouding ritual, remember what you are really looking at. Not a poison, not a maddening drug, but a bitter herbal medicine that became a national passion, took the blame for the sins of alcohol itself, and was banished from the world for 100 years for a crime it never truly committed. Not bad for a glass of green. If this story surprised you, hit subscribe. The Tiny Grand tells the grand hidden history of a tiny everyday thing every week. Drop a comment telling me which everyday drink or object we should uncover next. And if you learned something tonight, share this with someone who still believes the legend of the Green Fairy.